Excited, yes, it's too exciting.
Yeah.
Can we just do this outside?
Feeling in the air there.
I believe there's a motion.
Yeah.
For an outdoor meeting.
We could do it amphitheater.
I'll second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're setting it up out
Oh,
here.
yes, when class would
Sure.
occasionally want to meet outdoors.
Oh, really?
I do.
For meetings or
She's
like
just setting this up.
street view sort of thing?
I asked her, like, yeah, I'm only here for the weather house one. But it's for sure. Just figure out.
Yeah.
That's great.
There must be so much going on town.
Everything's getting tag on.
I know, during your. And everybody's screaming.
It's
how loud
awesome.
they are. I can just do that up here by the hospital. It's hard.
I skirted it.
I certainly always do the extra.
Say so, just tell them.
Could be that.
Not gonna have any fire trucks there.
Yeah.
But they. It does. Find myself sitting slow.
Good skin cancer.
Oh, yeah. It's that which kind? Yes. It's that one like that triangle curve that comes on. I kind of laughed down. I don't even think any kid, if you could make it, you could stay in the lane.
Yeah.
Persistent.
Yeah, they surgery now.
Like this one.
Okay, I'm gonna call this meeting of the planning commission to order March 25th, 2024 at, we're gonna say 4:34. And are there any citizens to be heard? None in the audience. I'm guessing none online. Okay. Any ex parte communications or disclosures by anyone? Looks like none. I should announce that all planning commissioners are here to report. And approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion for that?
I will make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from February 26, 2024.
Second.
Any discussion?
I'll just make a note that in the packet, it says, it looks like the year 23. So I don't know if that attachment needs to be. Okay.
Is that on the?
That's on the planning website.
Any other discussion? And with that small change, how many people approve of the minutes? That's everyone. President. County Commissioner.
Okay. Well, I was not at the last county commission meeting. I was wicked sick, and so I might ask for you to give a quick update on Escape, if that's okay, and then I have some other things. Because that was the only thing on that agenda, I think, that pertained, I can't.
Yes, so the item on the commission's agenda regarding Escape Adventures, CUP, was essentially they were going back and looking at what the compliance timeline should be for Escape Adventures to cease and desist. Their service, like commercial use basically on the property. Because they were not, at the previous meeting, they were not able to approve that CUP. But it was a weird thing where it wasn't, it was voted, there was a motion to deny it. But it was a split vote, so it was just not non-conclusive or inconclusive, I guess. And so therefore, I think Stephen had confirmed at that meeting that essentially the CUP just wasn't approved, so they don't have it. So in the meantime, the applicant had come through with an appeal to the decision, but there was really no decision. So we're gonna be waiting to hear what the hearing officer says about whether or not he can even provide some kind of a decision based on a non-decision. So it's kind of complicated, but okay, I think because the commission wasn't able to make a decision one way or the other to deny it or approve it, it's kind of left open. So you look like you have a question.
I always thought that one of these, the tie votes means something wasn't approved.
Right, yeah, so that's exactly right, but if it's not approved, I don't know if the hearing officer would come back and say anything different. I guess I'm really curious to hear what
It'll be interesting whether the hearing officer says, well, your rules say if it's not approved, it's not approved. Or whether
Right.
the hearing officer will say that.
Right, and there were some findings that were made by the commission in terms of the motion for denying it. So those findings were stated. And so I think maybe that's where the hearing officer might focus on whether those findings are valid or not. So anyway, so then if with the CUP not being approved, the next step would be for the commission to set a timeline for the outfitter business to cease and desist. And that's where they didn't have the time, I think, in the agenda to discuss that, where they wanted to kind of think about it some more. So that was postponed, and that's where it was being discussed at this last commission meeting. And essentially, well, staff had recommended somewhere between, I think it was 90 to 120 days for that to happen. That was staff's recommendation, but the commission didn't want. Oh, because of the appeal being submitted, they decided to postpone the compliance issue for after the appeal process was over. So, yeah.
Okay.
Does that kind of summarize?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was
And-
really.
And I'm kind of putting you on the
trying
spot,
to
sorry.
remember
I
off
just-
the cuff.
Yeah, okay, that helps. All right, so then the next thing, I'm gonna put you on the spot again. I'm trying to, go ahead.
Just because I'm a myopic river person and I don't really know, what is the nature of Escape Adventures? Is
So-
there an outfitter?
Mountain bike.
They're an outfitter. They do mountain biking and they're out on Easy Street. They have they had a subdivision recently where it was a 5-acre lot and then they subdivided into 4 different parcels, or it was a 5-acre parcel subdivided into 4 lots. And one of the lots they're using for, they have like a accessory shop essentially where they kind of store all their equipment. They also do have a lot of employees living there, like in all the different lots and housing that's provided there. And that's totally legal. The employee housing is fine. And it's not technically employee housing, it's just housing in general. People are renting. But the folks that are living there are driving the company vehicles home. So they're bringing those company vehicles home, and as a side effect of that, or a related aspect of that, some of those vehicles are like loaded with all the mountain bikes and the gear, and so they're rigging and de-rigging at the property.
That's a
And
commercial
that's
activity.
the real thing that like kicked it into a commercial activity for Outfitter Guide. And they themselves described that activity in their narrative to us.
Okay.
So that's what's causing it. And an Outfitter Guide, non-motorized Outfitter Guide service is permitted in rural residential zoning, which this is, with a CUP right now in our land use code.
I understand. Thank you.
So, yeah, it's interesting.
I have a different description, but I will let that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to it. That's like the really simple version. There's traffic
But yes, thank
impacts.
you for that.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, I don't know if we should just really touch on Castleton really quick, just to
Right.
kind of give the general public
Sure.
what's going on at Castleton. Do you mind?
No, I don't mind.
Okay.
So some of you may have heard that the historic Castleton campground was being looked at by code enforcement recently. It came to our attention when they submitted a grading permit application that basically this was a campground that we weren't aware of. It's essentially, it's an overnight accommodations use, and it's not within the overnight accommodations overlay map. So we were stuck in this position of trying to figure out how could it be compliant with the land use code, being also that Article 3 explicitly states that camping on private property is illegal in Van County anywhere. So we went back to find out if there was any like CUP that was granted or any kind of historic approvals or permits, and we couldn't find anything, no record of any approvals or permitting. So we unfortunately, code enforcement had to kind of put a halt to it while we could figure out what's going on, at least to address the permitting oversight of like the health department and the engineer in terms of the flooding, the potential for flood hazard, because it looked like it was in a drainage. And there is a pit toilet out there that the health department said they didn't have any record of it being permitted. So we're just looking at that and trying to figure out. Our first idea was that it would need to just come into compliance with an OAO rezone, but that doesn't seem ideal either because it's not necessarily a glamping or an RV park or anything like that. And so giving it the OAO layer would actually allow like increased entitlements than what it's basically just dry camping. So it came to our attention after we spoke with the Utah Open Lands folks that as we learned more about this area, that campground has been in place for, decades. And so then it was like the most logical path forward was just trying to find out and having them prove that it's a historic vested use. So it's considered, well, we're looking into the possibility that it could be considered a legal non-conforming use. And that it would just exist as it is in its current state. Utah Open Lands, they very much do not want to do anything more with that. They hardly want to even keep it as a campground because they don't really want to have a campground under their purview. But that is one of the things that's also a concern for us is that there should be some kind of local oversight of the campground. And currently, apparently they don't have anybody here locally that's kind of checking on it and making sure that there's not trash and, things going awry. So we're going to be asking for that as part of this process and making sure retroactively that the health department provides a permit for the pit toilet and the engineer's going to look at the floodplain stuff. So it should all work out, but it's just been a process.
Yeah. So, and hopefully you don't feel like I just figured it's kind of bubbled up, and I think it's best to kind of let people know what's going on. This is traditionally a climbers camp that's been around for decades. I was around when Friends of Indian Creek got formed. I was on that original kind of group of people that we actually helped facilitate that campground as far as putting a kiosk in. We did have a toilet at that time, but we were pushing for that because we were just trying to facilitate like managing climbers and climber impact. So yeah, I don't remember anything about like going through the proper channels, to be honest.
Well, and it was originally, it was a Sitla property, so
Right.
It became a campground when it was Sitla. So I imagine there just wasn't any, right, Mary? Like there probably wasn't.
I've never even heard of it.
I know, right?
I never even knew.
We're talking about the campground that's along the highway,
Mhm.
right below Castleton.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
I know. And it is just one of those, and OB probably remembers, it became, I mean, at a certain point, Sitla was gonna sell it off and it would become who knows what. And so really all these climbing, you know, whether it was Black Diamond, Petzl, they poured a bunch of money into purchasing that land and kind of keeping it intact, but
And an issue, of course, is if you had just abandoned it, though, people will do dispersed camping
right,
out there to be near,
right,
climbing. But it's a terrible precedent, way to start a campground.
right, right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dry camping situation. There's not a, I mean, it doesn't seem like there should be a lot of impact when you think about it, but I think the folks in Castle Valley, we've heard a little from the mayor about some concerns with issues of not having the oversight, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes it getting
Right.
a little rowdy or out of hand. I don't know. But
Felix is,
Climbers know.
but yeah. But Makeda, like, I know it seems a little trivial, like, why should we go through this whole, like, how did this get to this point? It's just like such a.
No, that's not at all what
Okay.
that was about. That is not at all what that was about. It was more about what Trish just said about
Oh, okay.
climbers being rowdy.
No,
is,
I mean, the bigger
Fair.
picture of all of this, I just want to note for everybody in the public is that if, like, we have to apply our rules evenly
Sure.
across the board. And so we have these rules in the land use code, and if we're not like applying them fairly, even though this seems kind of like bringing down the hammer on something that maybe is so benign, we have to do that. We have to be consistent. And there's probably there could be other instances like this out in the county that we don't know about yet, and they're just gonna kind of come about when they do, so. Yeah.
I didn't even know that was happening. And you said decades, I'm thinking, God, I'm remembering.
I know.
If you never sent you, they didn't ask that, like.
Elisa, have we talked to the Trust Lands Administration about their records of the land use there? Because many of Trust Land Administration's records prior to 1994 exist in hard copy in the state archives.
Well,
And so
that's great.
you should contact Brian Torgerson at TLA
That's
Yeah, I know
and
Brian,
find
yeah.
out what they have.
Okay,
a good
yeah,
idea.
Before 94, you won't find it online.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good idea.
yeah, totally.
Okay, so I'll speak really quick. I'm sorry, I'm kind of bringing up these big issues. And this just, and Tony was there, so I went to an open house about the Anson Resources lithium mining in Green River. This specific well that we went to talk about is in Emery County, but if you guys don't know, like, there's kind of this jigsaw puzzle disaster on the east side of the Green River. Right, it's not Emery County. It's a mess. But just so you know, Anson Resources is kind of actively pursuing exploration wells. That well, and they said that meeting actually was pre this well, whatever you want to call it, blowout. But it just happened to coincide that the Friday, I think it was the 7th or the 8th, I can't remember the exact date. They hit at about 1,500 feet. Those lithium wells, the goal is to go to about 10,000 feet, which is just crazy to me. But at about 1,500 feet, they hit a pocket of carbon dioxide, which pushed the overlying kind of briny water out of the well. It overran their property. They breached their property to let it flow into an old, I think it's just a tailing site, right? A uranium or a mill site.
Those are DOD owned. They were described to me as septic settling ponds
Okay.
from a legacy time during the Ultra and
Okay.
White Sands Missile Range, 1950s.
Okay.
Like 70-year-old
Yeah.
settling.
So it over and went into that site. The positive is it didn't go into, there is a block right there. This is all very close to Green River, half mile border, maybe a little closer, half mile. And just adjacent also to I-70 and adjacent to the town. So it's interesting in that sense. I think at least what the feeling I got from the meeting was, there were some community members very in support of it, some that were just reticent, like what's going on, some that were very opposed to it. And I think, the overriding issue is just how close it is to the Green River and how close it is to the town and the volatility of the paradox formation. Do you want to add anything to that? I just think it's good for the planning commission to kind of know what's going on.
I think you captured everything that I've got to say as a planning commissioner pretty well. They did indicate that they're interested in exploring the possibility of other lithium extraction test wells in Grand County proper. I think it's, as land use decision makers and planning commissioners, important to brush up on the
Right.
science and best practices of lithium extraction, and understand, at least at a cursory level, the state of the art with
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
It is water, fairly water intensive. They've secured 250 acre feet of the Green River. They have leased another 2,500 acre feet.
They've secured 500 acre feet
I'm sorry,
of vested water rights and leased another 2,500 acre feet of water rights. According to their reporting, they don't anticipate using more than 250 acre feet of those total 3,000 acre feet, which is their entitlement.
Yeah.
That's all numbers per annum, by the way.
So, just another thought when you talk about, trying to develop Grand County, the outskirts of Grand County specifically, and the water issues surrounding, let's say, Thompson. That's a lot of water. I'll just put it that way. So kind of an interesting aside, but I think just something we should watch. The last couple other things, I was at a Grand Water and Sewer meeting the other night. They do have a will serve from a truck stop proposal at Crescent Junction. They would be asking for 80,000 gallons per month from Grand Water and Sewer. I mean, one thing I'll state that, I just think the truck stop is an interesting thing, but Grand Water and Sewer, their load out fee is a little higher than, let's say, Green River. So the reality is they'll probably load out at Green River. And I guess the overall objective is to eventually get water. I'm not sure where they would get water, but right now they would just load it, which is interesting. So then that's just and then the last thing is, and I've been kind of intrigued to see what's going on, but you might know that Kins Lake has been kept really full. And I've been kind of wondering why. And then the other day at Grand Water and Sewer, they keep mentioning that they're recharging the aquifer. So they're purely looking at kind of what they're taking in at the Shealy Tunnel, and then, how much water is being lost. And they're not, in my mind, taking into consideration. I'm just saying this, like, they don't really have the technology right now to take into consideration evaporation. So they're like, oh, we're recharging both aquifers. That was the statement the other night. I kind of disagreed with them point blank. I said, yeah, I think you're probably recharging the valley fill. But that they have discussed with the Division of Water Rights the idea that they could then, add that water to what they'd be able to then disseminate. And so I kind of figured that was what was going on, to keep Kins Lake that full all winter long, which isn't usually the case, to keep bringing water into the Shealy Tunnel, but they had been. So kind of interesting. I mean, one thing I'll state very clearly, that Mark Stilson has made it known that he, one thing that the Division of Water Rights does not know is that interaction between the Valley Fill and the Glen Canyon. I think he's made that quite clear numerous times. So to state that the water and we know Kins Lake has been leaking since they built it, is my understanding, right? But that we can assume that water's going into the Valley Fill, but I don't think the assumption can be made that it's going into Glen Canyon. That's just an opinion. I mean, just like Marcus stated, we just don't know that interaction between those two aquifers. But I think it's interesting for the Planning Commission to kind of understand what the water service providers are also doing. Yeah.
So is that to say that they're kind of telling the state, well, we're recharging the aquifer this much, that means we can handle this much more capacity to go out?
Yeah, I think that's
taking into consideration anything for evaporation?
Well, so my understanding is for them to be able to do that, they'll then have to put all these instruments into place that are going to take into account evaporation, et cetera, and so on, for them to then begin to effectively calculate that. That's what they stated at that meeting. And kind of on top of that, just so you guys know, we are having a water workshop on April, will be 5th. The Friday, I think it's the 5th, sorry, 6 p.m. at Utah State. And the goal is to have the water service providers talk about, so Grand Water and Sewer, Moab Irrigation Company, and the city of Moab. to give presentations as to.
And there's time for questions.
And to have time for questions, so that will be a good one.
Is there a way to get in the invite list or do you need it? No, you just go.
Yep,
And
you just
can
go.
do it on
What time
Zoom
was that?
also.
6 p.m. that Friday. I want to say it's the 5th. Sorry.
Friday's the shit.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's Friday.
Yep,
Can I have a
6
quick
p.m.
question on the what, who did they buy these acre feet from?
I don't know.
That is not disclosed, doesn't need to be.
Doesn't need to be disclosed, okay.
I know I had heard from some old timers there a couple years ago that somebody was buying a bunch of water.
At
And
what
whether
time
that
they
was
were-
them, I don't know, but
Put what 3,000 acre feet means into context for local communities, for the public listening. 3,000 acre feet is 3 times as much as the largest agricultural operations that exist in eastern Utah.
yeah, so, and tell me if I'm wrong on this number, Tony, but I think a household is 0.45 acre feet, so then you can
Yes.
just do the math. Is that correct?
No, that's right, that's right, so 6,000 households of maybe 2.5 people per household, it's a lot of water.
A lot of water. So just, yeah, interesting.
Consistent with the plans for finding the lithium, right, they're gonna be using some kind of line.
Tony probably has. a
What
better-
they explained was that their target depth at around 10,000 feet is a lithium brine. And for the record, this isn't the exact number they said, but it was in the ballpark of 300,000 parts per million carbonates, which are just other kinds of salt, not necessarily sodium, but it's a different kind of salt. So big pressure, highly saline. It's the kind of chemistry that doesn't form at the surface geologically. And they use in a system of pipes and some enclosed kind of system, resin to extract these carbonates from the water, which can, the carbonates, the salts that contain lithium get separated out. And they said their intention is to re-inject the filtered, for lack of a better word, water into shallow porous layers of sandstone for future use. They didn't really elaborate what that meant, but there's an extraction and re-injection is way that gets disposed of at the end of it. They were pointed out that at this point, when everything is working the way their system is designed, there is no like surface air contact with this fluid. It's all run through pipes. It's an interesting brand new technology. It is, I think the writing is on the wall. Lithium extraction is the next oil and gas hydrocarbon extraction. And it uses every bit of technology that we've learned from, wildcatting oil in the 1930s up through hydrofracking and all that. It's very, very state of the art stuff.
Those levels are.
Isn't it crazy? It's crazy. Yeah, and just so you know, that wastewater that came out of that well, they're taking that kind of, that wastewater to Danish Flats, right? There's a wastewater plant out there.
If you've seen those new big tanks when you drive to Grand Junction, that's the Danish Flat. That is a state Department of Water Quality run facility that, that's what all those big tanks are on the interstate. That's a Danish Flat wastewater disposal facility.
Right next to one of the perennial streams that comes out of the book club somewhere. But anyways, that's just my aside. Anyway, not, I know, I'm sorry. I was just trying not to give my personal opinions. Okay, that's it. Sorry about taking up so much time.
Good information.
And is Dan gonna be here?
He is on
Zoom? Oh, he's on Zoom there. Okay, well, then we have a public hearing that I'm going to open.
Well, I don't think it's a public hearing.
Oh, it isn't a public
No,
hearing,
it's just
huh?
it's just kind of a vote. It's an action item.
It's just an action item.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we're ready then for Dan to discuss the road right of way with design exception for a portion of the old Thompson Town site. And I can just say this is an interesting thing. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was up at Thompson, and the big deal was the replat. And I know Trish has been involved in that, and so this is an issue that's been going on for years, yeah, forever. So Dan, I guess we're ready for you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and you should
Okay.
be able to share your screen if you need to. Let us know if you can.
Yeah, or if you have the packet in front of you, I included some exhibits with my staff report there that would be helpful. If you don't have them, I can share my screen and pull those back up. In a nutshell, the issue, I know you guys are aware and have worked on it longer than I've been involved, of the replat for the Thompson area. I included just because I thought it was curious, the original town site plat for in there. It was kind of fun. The lots were really tiny. I don't know what the logic there was. I guess maybe you just bought as many as you could afford or something like that. I'm not really sure because they were like 25 feet wide.
Yeah, shop, like the railway road, that was my understanding,
Yeah.
because of the rail, it was a rail stop, right? But they're just these little shotgun lots. That was my understanding. I don't know.
Anyways, the issue about the replat, trying to make it fit the best with all the landowners, the county surveyor was having an issue making it work with the 66-foot wide right of way that had originally been platted for these roads. He didn't feel comfortable changing that to a lesser width without it going through a formal design exception process. There is a procedure which I outlined in the land use code, or I mean in the Grand County construction standards, which say design exceptions can be granted outside of Spanish Valley based on the recommendation of the engineer and concurrence basically by the two commissions. So this is an attempt to fix that. Reducing it down to 48 feet width is kind of the minimum that we could get down to and still make it fit with the properties. Bill Jackson and I both think 48 feet width is sufficient for what's going to happen out there in the foreseeable future. That the zoning out there right now is actually, I think most of the town is still in range and grazing zoning, which would be 5-acre lots, but obviously there's a bunch of smaller lots already platted. So basically that's it, unless you guys have specific questions about it. I think I can pull up a drawing if you want to talk about it.
So do we have any questions?
Dan, I just had one. I think the road width or the right of way width is, it looked like that's well thought out, and I didn't see any issues there personally, but I wondered, given the long history here and the unusual layout, I guess you might call it, are there any other issues related to the replat, I guess is what we're calling it, that are pending yet, or is this the last big issue that has to be overcome?
I think that this is the last big issue. I know Commissioner Winfield's been working with landowners, specific landowners that have been kind of hold out, and he reported at the last commission meeting that he had, with this latest kind of version that I attached, that Lucas, the county surveyor, drafted up, he had gotten buy-in from all the holdouts, people that were holding out as far as doing it. There will need to be probably an official, the plat amendment will require signature by all the landowners that are in the area covered by that amended plat. So there's definitely some pieces to go through, but I believe Commissioner Winfield's been dogging that through the process. So here's the existing property lines. As you can see, they're way off up in this area relative to the roads and the lots. This was and this one doesn't read real well because the photo kind of is dense, but if you can see the properties, these are the new lots that are proposed based on current ownership and the best fit for Bogert Avenue. So one of the things on Bogert and the road department's where this will need to be reconfigured into just a T intersection, and this part that crosses this lot would be eliminated. Same thing down here. This would be made into just a T intersection, so it stays within that right of way. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer. I'm jiggling around when I talk about stuff. Can you see my pointer or not?
Yeah, we can see it.
Oh, okay, yeah. So these two ends of Bogert will need a little bit of road work to reconfine them to fit in there. There was originally platted those alleyways. To the best of my knowledge, no utilities were installed in those alleyways. The power is out in front. Power and phone is overhead out in front, and they don't have sewer and water. Well, I guess they have water now, don't they? Yeah, they have a water system, but it's in the roads. It's not down those alleyways where, we would have an issue with existing utilities that took advantage of those alleys and no longer. And if we take them out, then they'd be without an easement.
Yeah, this is looking really good. So this is the version that Lucas drew that's with the new road width. Is that right, Dan?
Yeah, this is with here's
Okay.
a clean version where you can kind of read the labels better. 48-foot widths.
It's really going to be a huge improvement for everybody. Pretty much, as far as I know, I think every single property owner gains a little bit of property, and it's just going to be so much cleaner with these new property boundaries and the road alignments.
And the road alignment for Thompson Canyon Road, the main road, is gonna reduce to 56. We wanted to keep it. That's our standard for right away for a local road. The existing standard is 56-foot wide right away, so we didn't want to reduce that one down for that. And that one wasn't. He was able to work with that as far as making these lots fit.
And so, just so y'all know, like after we get this approved, our next step would be to make sure that Lucas has, like, this is the final version of his plat that he drew up. And then we'll have it attached to a letter that we've drafted to all the property owners that would be affected by the replat, and we will send out a notification by mail and email, but both snail mail and email, to have them give their consent. Like, it'll be a little checkbox they can sign and say, okay, I agree with this plan for the replat. Let's go forward. And then that means we can basically, that's like their sign off for like a plat amendment. And then we can go forward processing it just as we would with any plat amendment. And then once we get it approved by the county commission, we would have to have like a signing party out at Thompson, maybe a couple different dates, because a lot of folks that have property here don't live there. So they may have to come in from out of town. If we can't get everybody there in Thompson to actually physically sign the second page of the plat, the Mylar, then we would have to like mail it to them so that they could sign and notarize their little signature block.
Isn't there a process through state code that if you do the public hearing, it doesn't necessarily have to have all the signatures?
I was wondering about that.
That's how
We went
we
through a whole thing with legal back a year ago or more, where we were trying to determine, John was trying to figure that out. Like, could we just do it where if we noticed it in the amount of time that it was, and nobody objected to it, then we wouldn't have to get everybody's signature.
That state law happened, in the 2000s.
Yeah, I think we need to revisit that, Mary, because
I would too.
I was perplexed by that.
It's a state law that
Legal
that allowed it. That's how come we put it
determination.
in the general,
Yeah.
I mean, the land use code, because the state law changed. So we
Right.
allowed it through the land use code.
Right,
And
that's
but the
how I
attorney would
read the
probably need to.
state statute, yeah. But, yeah,
But I still think it's a good idea that everybody in Thompson
yeah,
sees it, recognizes it. This
Right.
is such a good thing.
at least get the
Such a-
letter out there and get everybody's consent, and then if we can't get a hold of somebody, then, you know, we'll cross that bridge. But, yeah, it's exciting that it's definitely moving forward. And thanks to Commissioner Winfield, because he spent a lot of time like actually reaching out to the one last property owner who was kind of the holdout and like wasn't agreeing with the boundaries that were being drawn, which, you know, for whatever his reasons were, it's understandable. You know, but it's amazing that now I think we're actually to a broad consensus on this, so.
Yeah, I didn't think it would ever happen.
Yeah.
So Elisa, the language in the construction standards on design exceptions reads, just a second. County
we did-
engineer may
We did
grant,
lose you, Dan.
Oh.
Oh.
Back.
sorry.
Go ahead, Dan.
The county engineer may grant a design exception for construction outside the limits of Spanish Valley to be reviewed by the planning commission for recommendation to council. So I think that the planning commission's action would be a recommendation to council to do
Okay,
that. You probably could, the design exception could probably be processed by the commission at the same time as the plat is, you know, since they're
Yeah.
kind of dependent on one another.
And we
But
do,
I
we
think-
do in our packet have a
that's
recommendation.
true, but the way I wrote that was, I believe I made it that you would be approving the exception and not recommending approval.
Yeah.
So I guess I didn't remember what the construction standards, when I wrote that possible motion, I was thinking the planning commission was the final stop. But apparently the county commission will still have to give their final approval. So this would be a motion to recommend.
To approve. Does somebody want to make that recommendation or motion?
The motion right here. Oh, I got it, thank you. I move to approve the engineer's design exception to the Grand County construction standards to allow the road right-of-way width to be reduced to 48 feet for a portion of the area covered by the town site plat of Thompson, as illustrated in Exhibit C of the engineer's letter for the reason of reconciling the plat with on the ground condition with on the ground conditions, and in recognizing that the reduced width will be inadequate for present and future needs in the area. I should have said I move to recommend.
I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
It's about time.
Amen. All in favor? And Steve is absent for right now, so all commissioners except Steve.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, thank you, commissioners, for entertaining this.
Nice work, Dan.
Glad you're on board.
Okay, I guess then, next up is the update on the landscaping ordinance, and that is Elisa and Katie.
All right. Thank you, OB. So we do have the most up-to-date version in your packet of the landscaping ordinance draft. This is a draft of the landscaping ordinance. This isn't anywhere probably near the final version, but we hope it's getting there. So let's see, I'm gonna bring up that agenda summary real quick. What's that? Go ahead. Yeah, so we were just gonna go through each of the topics that we put in the agenda summary, the main sticking points that we're trying to still, either that was like a change from the last draft that we wanted to highlight, or something that we're still trying to figure out, and just have the discussion with you all on those items. So yeah, Katie, if you want to go ahead, she's been working hard on these ground cover requirements. I also have a little like diagram that I've started to create that works with modeling like a 1 acre lot for these requirements that, so when she's done describing, I'll get that up on the screen so we can start looking at that.
So, one of the sort of main things that we've been focusing on between the last meeting and now is really starting to think about the ground cover requirements for disturbed areas, because this was one of the main places where the rubber hits the road in this ordinance, one of the main places where we're requiring folks to do something. And so we really wanted to dial in the percentages that we're requiring for overall ground cover, and also for the percentage of that ground cover that has to be organic, and the percentage of that has to be alive. Living plant material. And we had talked about this last time in the last planning commission meeting. And personally, I really wanted to try to start tying those numbers into some kind of sort of scientific data. And so I was able to get some data from the BLM. We used their AIM test sites. So there are about 200 of these test sites across the county. And in each one, they have sort of a meter square area where they're checking the percentage of bare soil, the percentage of foliar cover, so plant material, and also a couple other specific species. And so did a bunch of analysis, overlaid Almernic ecoregions, and also overlaid seed transfer zones, trying to look at which one of these systems would be better and more sort of accurate for breaking down the county into different areas, where you can say everyone in this zone, the natural sort of ground cover in a reference in all the reference sites for this zones kind of approximates this sort of general percentage. And then so after analyzing that, trying to figure out, I was having trouble choosing between seed transfer zones and Almernic zones, because neither one of them really seemed to have statistically significant numbers relating to those things. And then we ended up having a conversation recently where we decided it probably makes sense to only regulate ground cover for areas that we're expecting significant future development in. So Spanish Valley, the North 191 corridor, Thompson Springs, and Crescent Junction. Areas outside of that, the impact isn't going to be as large. And then actually, once we pared it down to these, we realized that within looking at reference sites near each of these areas, the differences weren't actually enough to need like a zone breakdown. So we ended up settling on one set of percentages that actually applied to all of them. And the actual percentages.
Yeah, so I'm gonna share, I'll share the screen with what I started to work on here. So, okay, what you should be seeing is kind of a breakdown. Try to make that work. I'll try to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so I started, this is kind of just the exercise that I've been doing just recently today, and kind of doing a test for a 1 acre lot. And the requirements for ground cover are right here. So it's 75% of the disturbed area of the lot shall be covered with some type of ground cover. And so the disturbed area again is the area that has been historically modified by grading or grazing, or otherwise some kind of activity on the land where there's basically not a natural landscape anymore. And so when you take away when you take away the built area, which is all the buildings and structures and like driveways even would be considered part of the built area. Built area, according to like my kind of rough estimate of what this model scenario could be, is a total of 5,420 square feet. When you have a 1 acre lot, 1 acre is 43,560 square feet, but for my model in SketchUp, it was just a little bit under that. So we're looking at a total of 43,492 square feet for the lot. So when you subtract the built area, you're left with roughly 38,000 square feet. And then I estimated, just for kind of playing around with this idea of potentially on this 1 acre lot in Spanish Valley, there's still a little swath of the back of the property still has some natural vegetation that hasn't been disturbed. So that's the undisturbed area. And I estimated that could be around 5,000 square feet. And I'll show you the visual of this in just a second. And then, so if you subtract the undisturbed area, you're left with 3,000 square feet. So then that's the baseline of the square footage of the lot that you would be working with in terms of figuring out your disturbed area requirements. So 75% of that 33,000 would need to be covered with some kind of ground cover, whether it's living plant material, impervious ground cover like pavers, or like gravel kind of. I guess that's the same thing as impervious.
Well, so gravel, if it would be impervious, it would have to have spaces between it. So it would have to be some kind of pervious but inorganic. So that percentage, that 75% can be organic ground cover like mulch, living plant cover, or inorganic pervious, which would include both gravel and like flagstones spaced apart.
Thanks for clarifying that. I'm gonna try to share my screen with the model.
I did some quick math while you're pulling that up. 6,600 square feet for like vegetated cover on a 1/4 acre square lot is the drip zone, the canopy size of one mature cottonwood tree.
Right, I know, that's what I was just learning when I did my little model, so.
That's a
Like, I looked up what a typical mature cottonwood spread canopy is like, I think they were saying like 50 feet, does that line up with what you had?
Yep.
And then, like for a desert willows, like at maturity, it's like 30 feet for the canopy. So even if you had like a huge cottonwood and a couple desert willows on your property, that canopy in itself could be counted towards the living plant material, which, you know, the requirements that we have in our ordinance, draft ordinance now is 20% of the disturbed area. So that's 33,000 square feet. 20% of that would have to be living plant material, and that's 6,600 square feet. And essentially, when I did my little SketchUp model here, those big circles are tree canopies. They're about 30 foot. I think they're 2 of them are 30 feet. The other one's like 20 feet radius, or not radius, diameter. And yeah, that comes to 6,800 square feet just with those 3 trees. So it's not that hard actually to get, according to our current draft. And these are all things we're kind of just figuring out by doing this exercise. The rest of so if you look back here, this light red color, it's not very good, but this would be representative of the undisturbed area. So in this model, the undisturbed area is, where did I put that? think it's it's like 5,000 square feet. I don't know if I wrote it down in here yet. So the undisturbed area is like around 5,000 square feet. Then this other dark red area is kind of representative of the bare ground, which in reality, on a lot, the bare ground spaces would probably be the little patches all over the lot. And so these are things that we're like, when doing this exercise, we'll have to be thinking about how is the layperson gonna have a easy time figuring out how to calculate these areas and summing up the square footage, you know, so.
Yeah, I think this type of drawing is easier if you're trying to decide, for example, how much gravel do I have to buy? You know, then you can see it sort of all in one spot, but in reality, probably there'll be patches and with plants planted, you know, here and there.
Yeah, so the rest of this area, that's kind of this brown color was just gonna be like the mulch or whatever, just kind of.
Mulch or
mulch
gravel.
Gravel. And then I did a interesting little, I wanted to focus on the turf requirement, and that's what these two green areas are. So this little small one here is representative of 300 square feet, which is kind of what we've been talking about. This is what we have in the ordinance right now, and it's something I definitely am concerned with in terms of a large lot like this. I think it could be a little restrictive, like when you're talking about 1 acre of property. Are you, like, this is just a postage size stamp kind of area. This over here, this was representative of, this is a 1,000 square feet. This is a larger patch of turf. So that's kind of showing you a range of what could be allowed for turf. In the minimum requirements for the state, it's 50% of the lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which I think is, they were probably thinking in
50% of-
terms of more urbanized areas, lot smaller lots, and where if you think of 50% of an entire, you know, 1 acre lot, that's like 24,000 square feet or something like that. 20,000.
It's a little bit harder to understand, but in the state requirements, it's 50% of the landscaped area within the front and side yards.
Oh,
So also the landscaped area is a sort of a
It's not
complicated
really
concept. Yeah, because, you know, how do you define what counts as landscaped and what doesn't? Obviously, I assume everything built or impermeable would not be considered the landscaped area. But then, you know, if you have like an undisturbed area that you don't touch, is that considered the landscaped area or not?
yeah,
Like,
I don't
it
think the language in the state minimum requirements is not very helpful in terms of defining landscaped area. So somebody could probably make the case that their whole 1 acre lot is a landscaped area, and then they could, you know, put in 50% of their, like 20,000 square feet of turf, which would seem not very, it wouldn't be in your own self-interest to plant that much turf, I think, for the cost of watering it, but yeah, so these are things we're kind of grappling with. I think maybe we should go back to the agenda summaries, the turf grass limits especially. I mean, what do you, that was actually the very next thing on our agenda topics was the turf requirements. Like, it seems to me that maybe we need to have a percentage when it comes to smaller lots, and then maybe have a square footage maximum when it comes to larger lots or something like that. I don't know. Any ideas, Steve? Do you have
What you just said seems reasonable.
yeah.
Yeah, it could also just be like a percentage, well, yeah, it could just be a graded system too, of like, depending on how big your lot is, right? Like percentages with a max for larger lots or something.
Right. Yeah.
I, if I'm allowed to express an opinion, I actually have an opinion to the contrary. I think, insofar, it depends on what we're saying is the reason that someone should be allowed to have turf. And based on the conversations that we've had in the past, we see turf as an amenity, as something that provides recreational space, cooling, place for dogs, these sorts of things. And those things don't change depending on how large your lot size is. If we're seeing this as something that, you know, every person should have a right to a certain amount of turf to be able to do X, Y, and Z activities, I don't think that necessarily should change based on the lot size.
Is there, I don't want to get too complicated with this, but I'm curious, like, is there a way that we could cap grass or say, I'm just worried about heat sinks a little bit in this whole discussion, because just giving somebody with an acre lot and saying like, you can only have 100 square feet of grass, everything else can be rocks and gravel and mulch, is great for water consumption and conservation. But I'm a little concerned about the other factor, which is creating a bunch of material. I mean, we're surrounded by rocks, right? Everything is a heat sink where we are, but is it possible to say like, okay, well, like, I don't know, some way to encourage people, like an incentive to encourage people like to plant like trees or some way of getting people to, if we're gonna limit the amount of turf grass to such a small percentage, which I'm not against, having some other requirements of like covering some percentage of their lot with some sort of greenery other than just like,
Which we do have.
Yeah.
And so that's the 20% requirement right now, and maybe what needs to happen is we should be, and I think we talked about this before, is that we should probably look at having different sets of requirements for different size lots, because right now 20% of the disturbed area should be or is required to have living plant material. So whether it's going to be a little bit of turf and then some trees, maybe some bushes and shrubs. But for a 1 acre lot, maybe that's too small of there. You know what I mean?
It doesn't
So-
need to necessarily get very derailed, but you know, as the former arborist here in town, been up in a lot of the trees around here. It seems to me like an easy incentive to reach 20% vegetative cover on a lot is to plant a tree, but you cannot plant a mature cottonwood tree.
No.
So,
Yeah.
are we assuming that there will be an allowance, like I bought a cottonwood tree at the nursery,
Yeah.
but cottonwood grows to
Yes.
about 50?
That's how we've written it right
Okay.
now, is that
Okay.
even if you, at the time of planting, the canopy is just very minimal. It's based on the expectancy of the
Expectancy.
church. Yeah.
Perfect.
What about gardens?
Oh, edible gardens for sure can go towards your living plant coverage. And those living edible gardens and medicinal gardens, those plants that you would be planting in your garden would be exempt from the plant list as well. So
Cause if I had an acre lot, I'd have a bigger garden.
for sure, me too. Yeah.
I have a backyard in the city, I still want more.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky when you're I think a lot of, so when you look at a lot of examples for landscaping ordinances and what the state's minimum requirements are, I think a lot of the tendency is like they're looking at urban areas and not necessarily these big rural lots that we're dealing with in our county. And so we do have some areas for small lots, and we are going to potentially have some areas with more multifamily development, and then there's the commercial type of development, which is a whole nother kind of scenario. So I think it is tricky, like it's not necessarily going to be one size fits all. But in just doing this exercise and looking at the 1 acre lot, I think, you know, we can come up with some ideas to kind of make it work better. But I mean, with Katie's point about the turf, I currently live on I think it's a half acre, or maybe it's a little less than a half acre. I have a big yard and it's mostly dirt and some weeds and a few shrubs. And I've been dreaming of what to do with it. And I mean, I have 2 kids and they want to go outside and kick the soccer ball around, you know, and have time out in the yard. And so I I envision having grass for sure, like a certain section of it, not the whole thing for sure, but like a good section of the yard being grass. And that's just quality of life. Like we don't, we live sort of close to Old City Park, but a lot of people don't live anywhere near a park, that's accessible for their kids. So, and in walking distance. So I don't know. I'm torn about the turf requirement for sure. I definitely, and we do have the bonus that if you are using rainwater harvests that you harvested, rainwater storage water or rainwater recycled, that you could, you would get the added increased amount of turf allowed.
If you could prove that you were watering all of the additional turf with either your gray water or your rainwater.
Which could be tricky enforcing that. Now that I think about it.
The only thing we can do is we could require people to show a design of their system and show that it was capable of generating and storing a certain amount of gallons per additional square foot of lawn, and we could base that on averages for how much water that lawn would take.
There's also something in your ordinance or the regulations that you're writing that allows you to use the water from the water district, if you can get it.
The secondary water.
Yeah, the secondary water. If
Mhm.
that, if you had secondary water, could you, this just goes out of it? You don't have to worry about this?
Well, I mean, not necessarily.
We didn't include secondary water
No.
as an exception for lawn. It was only gray water or rainwater.
Right. And the reason is that the secondary water draws from the aquifer, and so with this ordinance being, the intent of this ordinance being like water conservation minded, we wanted to not necessarily just say, oh, if you're hooked up to secondary water, it's a free for all, just have as much water as you want, because that's not realistic.
Mind if you might add some, the secondary water actually comes out of Kids Lake. That whole system comes out of Kids Lake, but I think the bigger picture of that is that water's pretty much allotted, right? Like there's not going to be much more. I mean, the city of Moab has no secondary water, which we've discussed in the past, and Grand County, at least groundwater and sewer has, I don't know how much more secondary water they have to a lot, or
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
That's
The
true.
reality
There's
is
a
that-
very limited capacity there, and also though, Trish, isn't part of it's not, so the secondary water system, the public system is WISA, and that comes from Kens Lake, but also when we talk about secondary water, we're talking about wells, right? People who are on the wells, have wells as their,
Yeah, and all of that's probably, you're right. Good point. Yeah, thank you.
that's where I was thinking for the limitation on that. No, it's okay. I was trying to remember too.
I think something that's important to keep in mind with this ordinance is that we have nothing in here that limits the amount of water that you can use, unlike the city, which has a water budget. But so our mechanism for conserving water is limiting the types of landscaping that you can plant. And the largest tool that we have towards that is limiting lawn. So I think it's important in thinking about these things, that if we're allowing, if we're trying to encourage secondary water, which to a certain extent that might be useful, we don't necessarily want to mean that if you have secondary water, then you can have more lawn, because then it will use a lot of water from the Valleyfield aquifer.
And I was wrong by saying that the city of Moab doesn't have secondary water. There is the Moab Irrigation Company, but again.
Right.
I had a comment too on 1C.
Okay.
Thanks for putting that in there. I think that's nice. I don't,
In the agenda summary?
right there,
restoration
restoration
alternative.
alternative.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that was a good ad. I had a heartfelt comment about that in the last meeting, and I know, Tony, you had some comments about it too. But I think that seems to be a good objective anyway, and it may be a way for people to intend to disturb less while they build. So with the right steps, you can actually protect a whole lot. If you had a 1 acre lot, I think you could protect a whole lot more than what you had in your example.
Right.
I can speak to that a little bit. I think the important part of that is that it's an alternative. So it's a choice that you can make to follow a separate set of guidelines from the regular set of guidelines for disturbed areas. And I met with Kara from Rim to Rim to talk about, what sort of provisions would be necessary to ensure that people are actually taking the correct steps toward restoration and that they're not just using it as a way to get out of the other requirements. And I'm going to be working a little bit with her on trying to establish a set of guidelines and reporting requirements for making sure that you're restoring properly.
And this, obviously, we're not trying to say that you'd be able to restore the native landscape in our lifetime, but just that you could set the conditions for that to happen over time. So.
Well, and honestly, there's a lot of lots that are in town, I suppose, have already been, they're nowhere near what they were at one point, but a lot of lots further out are.
Yeah, there's still, it's very true.
Depending upon what you mean by disturbance, that is clearly Castle Valley raised badly, lots of cheatgrass and stuff. We do this kind of restoration alternative, but it wouldn't be, who knows if it's put back into its natural state, right? I mean, you have like 15 different grasses. They're all native grasses. Well, of course, not got rid of the cheatgrass, but who knows if it was that rich of a variety. But then it increases the seed bank for everybody else. And does get spread. It's all very interesting. I did think when reading through this, I mean, I guess cattle grazing is a disturbance. And then what do you do with people who have 10 acres in Spanish Valley in terms of these sorts of things? Of course, maybe they're agriculture.
Yeah, if it's a commercial, agricultural, like actively commercial livestock operation, then they would be exempt from the ordinance.
And if they weren't? Meaning that somebody who's given up on agriculture or bought land and doesn't do agriculture, are they going to have to kind of either do this reclaiming thing or meet these other standards?
Well, it would depend on if they pulled a building permit for a house on their 10 acres. That would be a big undertaking to create a landscape plan that would comply with our, if they weren't doing any more commercial livestock activity on that acreage, if they were just converting it to a personal, property for their own living, then it would technically have to come into compliance with the ordinance. But the other more likely scenario is that they subdivide that 10 acres and it turns into smaller lots that then each individual lot is going to comply with the requirements. But if it's just going to remain in agriculture, then it just does that, and it doesn't have to do. There's no landscaping required.
Also, grazing is not considered one of the reasons that something would be disturbed. No, it would not be considered a disturbance. Yeah.
Okay.
Grading, building, paving, and removal of native vegetation, but not grazing.
Okay, yes, because the grazing activity is
Not
so
bad.
historic in our area. And a lot of there's like this, there's the debate as to whether or not grazing is actually good for the
Well, and also
or not, if it's
Yes.
compatible or not. And so, yeah, I guess that was like something we didn't want to get into the weeds on.
grazing, I mean, regardless, there's some form of disturbance probably, but since there's no removal of soil, unlike the other three options, it's a different level of.
It would be, but it wouldn't be for a person who bought 10 acres and it had been alfalfa, but they aren't doing alfalfa anymore. That would be disturbed land, right?
yeah, if at some point native vegetation was removed in order to plant alfalfa, that would count as disturbance, yeah.
Yes, okay, yes, that's right. The actual grazing activity itself is
not,
not
yeah.
considered.
Exactly.
Is
If-
that
but-
explicit in there?
I think so.
I think we put it in there.
Yeah, grazing is not mentioned. There's in the definitions, at the beginning, there's a definition of disturbance which says, disturbed landscape, land that has a history of grading, building, paving, or clearing of native vegetation.
Yeah, I think.
It should be
that
a little
could-
bit more
it should be
explicit.
More clear. If we're
Okay.
gonna, you know, if the spirit is to allow grazing
Mhm.
or to make sure that that is excluded. I think someone could probably make the argument that clearing of native vegetation is like, well, if you
Okay.
graze it and they
They
cleared
clear
it
everything.
while they were grazing, I think that gets a little murky.
We can be a little more clear about that.
And that happens a lot on the mountain. I mean, you know, we're not, 'cause that's still a Grant County. There are people with 5 acre, 10 acre, 20 acre parcels up on the mountain. And if they don't fence out the cows eat it.
And as a clarifier too, that would not be under this ordinance, is that correct? Because it's not in one of those high likelihood of future development areas.
Right, we're at this point, and this is a recent decision that, and Katie and I came to the conclusion that we should probably exempt all those big properties out in LaSalle's and outlying areas in the county that we're not gonna necessarily see a lot of development anyway. And here and there might be somebody that wants to build a home or a cabin. It might not even be their primary residence, which likely it's not. In that case, those properties would be exempt from this. We wouldn't be looking at requiring landscaping plans for those.
This isn't bureaucratically, paperwork wise, cleaner. In addition to the areas that you've exempted from this already, to just exclude lots zoned for rural range of grazing.
Range of grazing, I think it would be tricky because almost all of Thompson is range of grazing mistakenly, like in error.
So little
So,
nose to spite the face.
yeah. I know, it would be nice. I mean, if we can get some rezoning done in Thompson, that might make sense at that point, but. Okay, so you were talking about this definition here in terms of.
Yeah, I think we can be a little bit clear about that. Just to be clear that that does not include grazing and maybe clarify exactly what clearing of native vegetation means. And for me, what that comes down to is the understanding that there's grazing that occurs within the natural landscape, and then there's grazing where the natural landscape was removed and some pasture was planted for grazing.
Yeah.
And the former would fall under undisturbed, in my opinion, and the latter would fall under disturbed. So we can make that a little bit more clear in the definitions.
I think you guys are on the right track. You're getting it solved itself. I'll lend the tidbit that clearing in forest practices and agriculture is a term of art that generally refers to another term of art when we say indiscriminate removal of vegetation. A forest clear cut does not target a specific species. It removes all species of trees. So when I hear clearing, I think the removal of vegetation writ large, regardless of its nativity or ecosystem function. Whereas, you know, landscape conversion, if you asked a range con or a forester, would not necessarily be considered clearing because there's other plants coming back. So if I know what you mean to say, I just don't think that that word might be muddying things up a bit.
Yeah, that's understandable. We can make that distinction.
Yeah, just
I might talk to you more about that later.
yeah, I know. I need to do better at my inbox. I'm really sorry.
It's okay.
A little earlier, and I don't know if this will ever be a problem. In 6.4.1, A2, you prioritize different sources of water. And so it's down there, yeah, the number 2 that's down there on your screen. You're prioritizing rainwater, then gray water, then secondary water, then culinary water. And I'm wondering what implication that has for, let's say, prioritizing rainwater and then gray water. Is it more important to harvest water off your roof or put in a gray water connection? Which should be prioritized? Although I do think saying, culinary water should be, in this hierarchy, culinary water should be the very best, the last thing. But I'm not sure about things like gray water, rainwater.
Yeah.
Did we have a?
Honestly, that was taken from Brad Lancaster, the sort of like more permaculture principles of rainwater catchment. So I don't necessarily actually, now that you bring it up, I feel as though the top two can be on the same level.
Yeah, it'd be pretty easy to say prioritization rainwater and gray water. And
Yeah,
have the thens in there.
right.
From what I've seen with gray water and rainwater here, you're just like, okay, you get 3 bonus trees, 3 bonus fruit trees. You couldn't support a lawn with the rainwater here unless, I mean, you had 10,000 square foot house, maybe 100 square feet more. I've seen some of these systems and plumbed them. You just, yeah, I mean, I get it, like prioritizing those things. I just it's such a small spot or such a small amount of water.
Do you think though,
They make
I
us
mean.
feel good.
I mean, it's cool. I
Do
mean,
you
do
think
it, but
though
like
that it could
coming
be,
up with this system where you're like, oh, you get like, so much more turf or whatever. I'm like, I don't think you could even support any turf.
right, just by your rainwater, gray water alone? I think that's true. Like I think that there needs to be maybe a little bit more research into that. Like how much do you have to actually water that lawn? And how much, rainwater can we catch during a season? And I've been wondering that myself. Like I tend to think it's probably unlikely that you could water any portion or sizable lawn with only rainwater, gray water. Like it would have to be supplemented by something else. But would it be still something to encourage or incentivize in terms of supplementing the water that we're using? Like, especially because a lot of people are watering their lawns with culinary, just out of no choice of theirs. It's just the way it is.
Right.
It's probably still worth it to try to, create the conditions where those, or incentivize those systems and that prioritization. Or is it just totally not worth it? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I just think it would be hard, right? Like, it's like the incentive would just be to use it, right? Like, a lower water bill, I guess.
Yeah, true.
So,
I guess if you think about the cumulative impact of that, though, what if we had like, if you're talking like
right,
hundreds of properties that are
yeah,
using their gray water, rainwater. And
Oh,
like,
I
even
mean,
if it's just a percentage that they're
increase
using.
consumption by law, do that stuff, but like irrigation requires so much water. It's like,
Right,
okay, you can reduce your house by 30%, but compared to watering grass, it'd be like reducing 2%.
yeah.
It's like,
I mean, also if people are using gray water and rainwater for a lawn, I mean, we're not necessarily achieving anything. We're
With our
just giving them
standards,
a
gray
little
water.
bit of a break.
yeah, no.
Yeah.
Without how we have gray water set up here, you can't water a lawn here with gray water. Like this system that's approved by the health department is not for lawns. It's these mulch beds. And you could have some trees, but they're not grass. You
Okay.
cannot do grass here
Got it.
with that.
That's good.
And that's where I'm like, well, with the rainwater, I mean, you can have a 2,400 gallon tank of water here. But I mean, you would use that in a week for like a small area and it would have to rain every week. It doesn't.
So
it's
it'd be more for your like your trees, your shrubbery, like the
dude,
kind
I've
of
seen small drip lines.
xeriscaping stuff that you have out in your front yard.
Yeah, exactly. Just so you, I mean, I'm just saying like, this is how much water you're really getting.
Right.
And then you're constrained by storage.
Okay. That's
But
good. I think we should.
Incentivize, I don't know how you would incentivize, other than just having it there and people are like, oh yeah, I'll use it. I don't.
That's really useful feedback though. Yeah, I think we can look into it.
Yeah, I think we could do some modeling, you know, come up with some numbers. I'm sure there's numbers out there for like average, you know, water that is needed to water a certain amount of lawn.
I would put some other feedback out here. So I was working with a customer, they were like, I mentioned the sod buyback program and they had to they were thinking about just tearing up the grass in their front yard. And it was like, oh, hey, okay, you got it's $3 a square foot for grass. And, I mean, this is more of a broad feedback thing. So it was like, okay, you could get like $3,000 back if we redid your yard. All right, I think to redo their yard would have cost like $5,000. So it's just like the state's playing ball, that's a lot, but it's not gonna be like, oh, sweet, I'm gonna redo my yard. It's like, do I have to? Oh man, this is gonna be, okay, I'll do this paperwork. And then it's like, I gotta find somebody. It's a big pain in the butt. I don't see people clamoring for the city's program. I don't see, and I do irrigation systems. I don't see people running for it. So I'm also like, okay, there's that. The other thing is, I talk to my neighbors and stuff. They're not quite happy with the city's landscaping ordinance, right? I just talked to a guy that has a place in the city and the county. He's like really upset that this county's now gonna do this. He was like, they already put, and this is what I would put this sentiment. They just wrote 42 pages of landscape ordinance that I don't want to read. I don't want to read it. That sucks. Now you have people wondering oh my God, do I have to pull a permit to plant a tree? In most landscaping, it's done one plant at a time. You go to oh, hey, this plant died. You rip it out and put something else in. I've been thinking a lot about this, right? And I appreciate the work into it, but we already have a mechanism for distribution of water, right? WISA charges you a certain amount for how much you use, right? You have a base rate. It's 14,000, I think it's 14,000 gallons. Okay, that's in your water bill. It's like $25, whatever. You start using more of that, you start paying more. Well, that seems like a pretty good, hey, you got the socialism part, redistribution of wealth. If you're poor, you can afford water. If you want more than that, you're gonna pay a lot. So I'm like, here's the thing that people aren't clamoring for this buyback program. So we already have something that doesn't need much paperwork. And it's hey, yeah, you want a lawn, Gubby Rich. There's 100 units of water out there. We all get entitled to one. There's 20 units left for above your basic consumption. Now those 20 units, okay, what's that cost? Does it cost $2,000 a unit? Maybe rich people only have lawns, but I'm as a citizen, I'd rather take that system than the system of weird paperwork. I don't know.
I hear you for sure.
I think this is gonna go over like a lead balloon. I think people are starting to get wind of this in the county, and they're getting to be oh, what are those guys at the county doing? That's what's gonna happen real quick with this is coming to build, and I don't think it's popular,
So
unfortunately. And I understand the need.
No, I know. I recognize everything you're saying, and we're very cognitive of this issue. I think for the individual property owner, this really isn't gonna do anything. It's not gonna make them do anything.
Well, hold on. If I
unless-
wanted to do an ADU, now I have to do $10,000 in landscaping.
Well, we want to avoid that scenario.
But
for
you're
sure.
saying if I change the footprint of my property, now I have to do landscaping.
Well, and that's where we're looking at doing all this modeling exercise is to make sure that we're not boxing people in or making them do crazy things with their, expensive improvements on their landscape. Most likely, a lot of people's landscapes already meet the base. Our requirements in the county are much less than what the city is requiring. And I know for the city's sake, I just want to say, I know that they have put out there, they've done a lot of public outreach, and maybe they need to do more, but that there's a lot of resources that they have. They want to help people to figure out the paperwork and the code, and they don't want people to just be left out there with these 40 pages of code that they're just supposed to figure out on their own. So they put out, they have some program, or I don't know, it's a program or whatever, but it's some kind of scenario that their staff is willing to work with people in creating their water budget and their landscape plan and all that stuff. So there's resources that are available. That's one thing. The other thing is, I get it, like we don't want in this ordinance to put so much burden on the individual property owner. The mom and pops of our area, like, no, definitely not. But here's the other side of this is this landscaping ordinance would be for new subdivisions. It would be for multifamily development, and it would be for commercial development. So there's a whole bunch of other development, like large scale development, that would be able to afford, and they would be putting this in brand new. It wouldn't be going back and like renovating their landscape and putting in tons of money. It would be, they would have to submit their landscape plan to come into compliance, or to be in compliance with these requirements from the get-go, from scratch. It wouldn't be like having to go back and do any retrofitting. You know what I mean? So a huge part of this ordinance is more geared towards new development, commercial, multifamily, that kind of stuff.
Can I pop in on that just
Yeah.
because it's really relevant on that? What I'm hearing there is for any new development, however, there is under the draft right now, the 6.4.3 applicability and exemptions under looks like B. So it says all existing properties will be considered legal, non-conforming, right? So that's really important as per section 1.10, which I don't know what that is off the top of my head. So until a major change triggers a need to come into compliance. But then importantly, it says such changes include, and there's only two additional bullets there. Does that mean include, but it's not limited to? Because that's where I have a little bit of an issue, where it's just like I'm not clear on what that means, and I think the public at large will be a little confused here. Like, are there other conditions that would come into effect, or is it solely these 2 points are the only things that trigger a change, that change
Right.
from
I think
being
the intent
non-conforming?
was just for those two.
Yeah, those are the two.
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe we could clarify. Well, and I don't, maybe
Just
I'm
use like more.
I just look at these and I'm just
changes
skeptical of like, what does this,
are-
how is this actually going to be interpreted?
I can't get
Right.
this,
And-
what he's talking about to show up on my computer.
No,
Can-
correct.
Can you put it on there?
Steve, are you?
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just one last point on this, because I do look at 6.4.3B number 1 there. And so a building permit for addition/renovation that increases impervious surface by 25%. And Katie, I think I might have commented on you on that one, where maybe we need like an actual like number of square footage, because
That's what I was.
to Aaron's point, he said like, we're talking about putting an ADU on, and then now everything else is out of compliance, and per this language here that they would have to come into compliance since they're legal non-conforming. And I think if someone that has a simple 1,000 square foot house, and if they want to put a 250 square, that's tiny, and so for them to have to come into compliance with everything else, to me that isn't fair.
I agree.
And I think we'll be met with a lot of backlash, and there's probably more instances too when it's just aside from just, oh, we want to put on, well, I think of somebody who has horses or any other animals that are you know, kind of livestocky, but they're not commercial, right? So they're not automatically exempt. And let's say, you know, they have their small house and their animals take up the rest of their lot. Like what then is required of them? It seems like maybe there'd be additional plant material coverage requirements. And I want to, you know, I think we'd like to preserve, you know, some of the rural setting here.
Yeah, that's good feedback. Thank you.
Can I get my word in?
Sorry.
Thank you. I was gonna say that I agree with what Steve's saying. I feel like there is allowances to make it easier for people with smaller lots to do certain things in this ordinance or in this language, but I think this particular targets people with smaller lots and therefore often people with less money.
Right.
Requiring them to, like Aaron's saying, spend a lot more money on their landscaping. I'm thinking of my property, which is I think a 0.2 acre lot.
Right.
It's a pretty small lot. I have a 18 square foot house. I don't know how many square feet my driveway is. It's
Yeah.
not a lot, but I did the quick math. And then if I were to put an ADU in my yard, that's 25% of my impervious surface would be like 450 square feet.
Right.
Which is possible, but is small. And so that would require me to redo my entire yard. And so I'm just thinking of, I'm thinking of the exact same thing of putting either like, you know, there's a cutoff or a trigger for a certain property size where it turns from a number to a percentage or vice versa.
Right.
But yeah, something that, yeah.
Yeah.
I would just a quick comment on that, and I don't think property size, like the area necessarily equates to like the value of it, because right, if you get further out, you know, the closer you are to the city, a smaller lot may be, you know, the exact same price as a larger lot out further from the city, right?
Right, but if you have acres and acres, like on a horse farm, it's more like in Spanish Valley, it's probably, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
I would posit really quick, guys, that exactly your scenario, you've only got enough space, you're gonna put an ADU out there. Don't punch me. Coming back out of the bureaucracy, talk about ecosystem functions. If you build an ADU and then that ADU is impervious surface, asphalt shingles, tin roof. But then you collect rainwater off that roof and you use it on your yard, you have functionally negated the impermeability of your roof.
Right.
So there's like, let's go back to what the point is and say like, could there be a carve out, an allowance to say like, if you're building an ADU and you're including rainwater collection, that is not an increase in the impervious surface because that rainwater is not going into stormwater and down to the Colorado River. It's staying on your lot and permeating the soil,
Right.
right?
That's
So
a
that
really good-
just, you
that's
know,
a really
keep
good
it clean.
point. Yeah.
Let's go get back to the point.
We are actually.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think what you're coming at is like, what is the point? We're trying to have water for more development, right? Like, we don't want, I mean, that's why the state's doing this. We want more development. So we have to have water for development. Right? That's the whole point. And so I'm like, how, like, is this the best way to that? I mean, we're advisory committee to the county commission. I still think stay with attack it more at a free market thing with supply and demand of water. I hear it, but I also think it also makes this homogenized type of housing where every house has 3 trees on it. And if one, you know, I just see that. I'm like, I don't know. Like, are we gonna get a certain look that I like the funkiness of Moab? I like a trash yard once in a while.
And I like that too, Aaron. And I don't think that we're designing this to be super prescriptive and saying like, you can only have, you know, you should have 3 trees. And that's like, we're trying to design it so that it is very flexible and open. So that's why we're using these percentages. You could do with any kind of live plant material or any kind of ground cover within these percentages. So it's not like just because like the model that I created was just kind of choosing some easy things that could be used. But I mean, I could create a bunch of different models with a bunch of different scenarios and they would all look very different and they would still meet the requirements of the ordinance. But I hear you, like, we don't want to get, I personally, and I know for probably represent the rest of my staff, like none of us like homogeneous prescriptive type of planning requirements. Like that's not what we're going for at all. we want to avoid that completely. But to your point about the water usage and like free market kind of just regulating this.
And I'm not a free market guy. I can't believe
I
I'm
know,
saying.
it's okay.
I'm like, oh my God.
That is the state we live in.
But
so-
it's really interesting, like we do have some interesting data coming in, there's a survey out right now that Katie put out, through GWISA, it's a partnership with GWISA to understand better, like what people are using their water for. And there are a lot of high water users in our county that they're just paying, they don't mind, they can afford it, they're paying a lot of money to water with culinary water. And they're using a lot of water, and it's like, should we care about that, or should we maybe put a, some kind of.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, just charge more.
Well, they're charging more, they've increased their rates, but it's not necessarily gonna impact some of those people, so.
I guess to that point, have we, has there been the discussion, or it sounds like maybe there's been an element of this discussion, but is, to Aaron's point of this, I love that term, that phrase, this is gonna go over like a lead balloon, like, what's the kind of the cost benefit? Is it favorable to just say, okay, there's gonna be a couple big users, we don't like it? Is it addressing that? Is it worth riling up the community where we have something that riles up the community once a month? So I kind of just, that's what's been in the back of my mind. Like, is it really, is it worth it?
It's definitely part of the conversation, and I think that it'll be part of the discussion, and I did want to say this, I should have said it in the beginning of the discussion, that we will be bringing this forward to the commission at their next meeting as a workshop. So this is the first time that they will actually be seeing the draft ordinance and kind of learning about the main requirements. So it'll be interesting to hear what their perspective is, and I'm sure it'll get some public interest. We have intended to go to the public for an open house. I don't know, we haven't talked about like setting that up yet, but we do want to present, once we get close to having something that's more what everybody is kind of somewhat on consensus or has some consensus on. We wanted to be able to bring something out to the public and get more input. And I think it'll be really helpful to use those like models to show like what the requirements would look like on different size lots and with different square footage, homes and that kind of thing. I was gonna say one more thing about that. I can't remember. Oh, just that this ordinance isn't necessarily, it's not all about water. It's also about reducing the heat island effect. It's about kind of respecting the, like trying to encourage more of the native vegetation to remain if it's still there, and just not like clearing lots when subdivisions come in. A lot of times they just clear the lots, and it's just a scraped lot, and there's no reason for that. If they can avoid it, they should, and that's where this ordinance would come into play.
I also wondered, I didn't see, I read most of it. How I was saying, like, the irrigation system should be a part of the plumbing inspection code thing, because I just saw a really crappy irrigation system today, and I was like, this is not like this. No. Well, we'll look. I still just think keep coming across that being so important.
It is super important, yeah, for water wise.
I don't know if that's more of like a Bill thing,
Yeah, we do need to work more with Bill, probably on matching this up with buildings. I guess, I don't know.
I mean,
Building inspector only inspects within 18 inches or 3 feet of the house.
yeah.
It might not be built, I don't think there is.
I think the only things that would apply to building code would be the requirement to stub out for gray water.
Well,
But
anytime
that's very
you
basic.
touch a plumbing system, you technically need a permit and it needs to be inspected, but no one does, that's fine, whatever. But I'm just saying, it's like, that's the problem.
Oh, you're talking about the inner workings of the plumbing that serves the irrigation.
Yeah.
And enforcement. I hate to bring it up. We had landscaping ordinances and just never.
Yeah, I mean, this, in general, everything in here is organized so that we can check it during the application phase, and then that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And we're trying to keep that in mind in the way that we're organizing it.
Now to kind of counteract some of the things, I just was saying, I was talking with one of our contractors that just kind of got out of California. And he was saying what was interesting was, when you have these housing markets where there was a lot of like rentals, he was like, the landscaping, it really brought down the value of home property because the rentals, people just don't take care of their lawn when they're rental units. And I'm just saying this as maybe another viewpoint onto this stuff. So it was like always this thing, like I think about multifamily housing outside capital owning these places. And it's like, I think if you're making money off of housing here, yes, stick to a landscaping ordinance. But I just was hearing from him, he was like, oh yeah, the landscaping always was creating weed problems and stuff because of it was not the owner taking care of it.
Right.
So
Right.
anyways, kind of goes.
I mean, yeah, ideally, we're trying to move toward a model of landscaping that's easier to take care of and easier to keep looking good in
Right.
situations of drought. A lawn is an extremely high maintenance type of landscaping that requires watering, mowing, all this stuff to
Well,
keep it.
it requires labor too, and it's something that doesn't exist in this valley, is like cheap labor. And, when one of the landscaping guys were saying they're paying close to $30 an hour, that's not cheap landscaping to like get it done for yourself. Like, good for him for paying people money, but like, this is also a thing we don't have in the county. This whole county needs to be landscaped, the whole valley, like who's doing that?
There, they just didn't.
Right.
Been there forever.
So, we had a lot of dirt lots now that needs to be.
Yeah, I know everybody's gonna want a closed discussion because we've been going on a ways, but I'd like to make just one comment about this, and that is one of the things that seemed positive when all this was brought up to me was, I guess there were really two things. One is that there's water conservation. And so if that was one of the objectives of this is water conservation, can we look at this and say, oh, in the end, we need to be able to look at this and say, yes, we succeeded. And I think there's I guess the other part two of that is in order to conserve water, we have to cut down on the amount of grass. I don't think there's any other way to do that. And not everybody's going to be happy with that.
Right.
But I guess if everything else went away, but we cut down on the amount of grass and we reduce water consumption, have we succeeded? We probably have. And so anything in addition to that is just an additional benefit. It's just gravy. And that makes it a lot simpler. The other thing was we were looking at getting state money to redo people's lands. And if we've succeeded, if this new ordinance or this new regulation succeeds in doing that, then I would say that's been a success as well.
I agree. Yeah. Okay. That's good to bring that perspective back to us. Thank you, Jerry. So do we want to have more discussion on the turf grass limits in terms of, I think what we were kind of leaning towards with the recent discussion was that we might need to think about turf in relation to the lot size, or do we not care about that?
Lisa, the county from a tax perspective considers a house, you get the residents a reduction in taxes with a house on 1 acre, right? And anything in addition to that, you don't. I mean, if you got a 10 acre lot and you're building a house on one corner, you're not impacting the other 9, right? Should we consider something like that? Consider that, that a house in 1 acre is affected, the remainder is not.
Like a building envelope kind of,
Yeah, kind
yeah.
of.
That's an interesting idea. Building envelope is kind of like, if you do have like such a huge piece of land. Usually if you're doing development on that, you're not gonna like think about landscaping the whole 5 acres or whatever. You have a building envelope, which is just kind of your little area of disturbance.
I feel like that's contained within the disturbed and undisturbed distinction though, no?
Yeah, that is.
Well,
Possibly, but there could be a bunch of bare land out there that's disturbed that they might not. Yeah, I don't know, like.
That maybe it's
Realistically, with five.
a burden.
5 to 10 acres, it might be tough. We're probably gonna have very minimal areas like that where we have somebody with a 5 or 10 acre lot that needs to,
I think south you have some of that.
there are,
Then they're gonna throw an outbound on grass. If it's out in the valley. they're gonna throw
Yeah.
it out in the 5 acres, way before they throw in 5 acres of grass. It's the outbound. You know, and every situation is gonna be different.
I know, that's the thing.
What Jerry said about what we're trying to do is conserve water. And grass does need a lot of water, unless you've got grants and big place of water all day long. That works.
Yeah,
A lot of water going down the ditch. Grass, I think putting in some kind of a specific size of area for grass, just specific to the size of the home. Maybe
Oh,
that would be-
relative to the home.
Yeah, maybe that'd be a better way to go, because if you've got a bigger home, you're gonna have, obviously have more children, so you need more grass.
Maybe
in circumstances. You have a smaller house,
relative to the number of bedrooms in the home.
something like that, you know?
Yeah, like,
Or people who like to play outside.
That's
Most
like-
people love their grass.
Yeah, Katie and I spoke about this too, if we're, eventually gonna dwindle down all the turf, we have sizable families here. Well, someone wants to go and play catch with their kid on grass, then that's gonna put more pressure on our already limited parks, which we know that even locals don't even get to really enjoy, at least in the city. That's kind of overrun by visitors. So what are we doing to offset this? Because it is still one of those, I mean, we call it an amenity and it is in some cases, but it's also, maybe not, it's definitely not essential. Some might make that argument.
I would agree that the home size to turf grass area is a more cogent relationship than lot size to turf grass area.
yeah,
Right.
that's a really good idea. I love that. Makes a lot of sense.
I just want to say, I also really love grass. I love to sit in grass. I love to lay in the grass. I just love to be in the grass. I'm from Iowa. Grass is everywhere.
That's good.
It's green and moist and it's lovely. But
Yeah.
I appreciate what everyone's saying about wanting to have grass and playing ball and stuff, but we live in a freaking desert.
Right.
If you want grass in large quantities, you should probably consider living somewhere where luscious grass grows freely and we're not wasting a ton of water on it. I don't want to be harsh, but that's what I had to adapt to when I moved here. I was like, all right, I'm giving up my grass because it doesn't make any sense to have tons of turf grass in a desert. Like, I don't want to offend anybody or hurt any feelings, but
No,
as a wholehearted grass lover, it's a bit of a like mental gymnastics for me to justify it in the desert.
I totally agree with that.
Mowing grass is a lot easier than mowing weeds, in my opinion. That's what I like. But I do want to get rid of, I'm not rid of it, so.
I think in all this, one thing that I've learned is that in the valley in particular, where there has been alfalfa farming and that alfalfa has sequestered nitrogen in the ground, it's a place where it's easier to grow grass and it's easier to grow weeds now than it used to be in the original environment. And so when you try to sort of move that landscape back to what maybe would have been there previously, you're going to get a lot of weed problems. And I think a lot of folks are hesitant because they've figured out a way that grass can work for them as a ground cover. And I think that's something we need to be aware of. And I've been trying to be aware of in this distinction between disturbed and undisturbed, and that like, let's not make that problem worse. And then also with the disturbed situation, understanding that's actually a lot more difficult to achieve all these metrics if you have a disturbed area. And so trying to figure out, yes, it's important to achieve these, you know, ecosystem and public health, like sort of basic requirements, but how do we make that possible for folks? So that's what I've, you know, been trying to juggle with this.
It's tricky.
Okay, so I think we will continue to develop this concept or kind of tweak the turf limit requirement and play around with the idea of it tying it to the square footage of the home. And trying to find that kind of compromise, like that happy medium between like maybe providing some area, like some usable area of grass, but also within reason, being that we live in a desert landscape. So I think there's a balance we can strike there, and I don't think we're quite there yet, but we will just keep working on it. Okay, so as far as drainage goes, we've been toying with this idea, and I've been kind of pushing for it, is that we have a drainage section in our code in general developments, the general development article 6. And we also have in the landscaping requirements, currently it says landscaping and screening, so it combines screening. But there's also a section for fences and walls. And so one of the ways we were thinking about maybe improving the code was to actually put screening with fences and walls, and then landscaping and drainage together, so that drainage can be addressed as part of your landscape, because they do have a lot in common and are relative to each other. So let's see, let me go to the code section for the drainage. I just for kicks, I started to copy that section, that drainage section, into the draft code. And we also had already drafted some basic requirements for drainage in the landscaping ordinance. And so we wanted to, you know, probably organize that better and put that with the drainage section. So let me just pull that up here. And do you want to just provide, you had some really good language in your updated draft, yeah, that, about kind of the overall purpose or intent of the drainage?
So one of the reasons that we liked the idea of having drainage together with landscaping is just to make folks make the connection between landscaping and drainage. You know, if you have particular earth shaping technologies to retain water that can help with, you know, being able to grow more stuff, and just understanding the relationship between, like, if you're changing the earth and, you know, how it's shaped in the process of landscaping, that's going to change your drainage. So just kind of really wanting people to connect the dots more about that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that drainage requirements belong here. And I think that's something that we've been going back and forth about. But either way, I think it's important to have at least some explanatory language. So just drafted something that said all landscape plans shall take the movement of water through the site into account as a primary factor in landscape design. Pre-existing natural drainages shall be respected, and stormwater generated by buildings and impervious surfaces shall be retained and infiltrated on site to reduce burden on stormwater systems and make stormwater available as a source of irrigation. See section 6.4.8 drainage.
Right. And so currently with the land use code, any development that creates 7,000 square feet or more of impervious surface kicks it into the next level of drainage oversight, which they would have to submit a drainage plan and get that approved by the engineer dealing with their stormwater drainage runoff. That's usually for large commercial developments and maybe multifamily, but for just individual lots in a subdivision, we didn't really have anything that talked about, you know, retaining some of that stormwater and
directing it either towards your existing landscaping to help water it, or at least directing it towards the natural historic drainages and letting it flow off your property. There's nothing in our code or any other requirements that would take like an individual lot when somebody pulls a building permit and ask them to do, like, look at their actual lot in terms of drainage. So that's been something that actually Bill Hulse has brought up a number of times since that storm in 2022, that we really should have some baseline requirements, something that people need to be thinking about in terms of dealing with the drainage, stormwater, you know, for a large storm event, like what is going to happen to the water that comes running off their property. So this is to kind of get to that. And so right now, you know, we state at the very beginning, this is our current code calls for, you know, not disturbing historic drainages at all. But recognizing that past things have happened, and maybe when you come to you bought your property, or there's a subdivision and there's already alterations that have happened to the natural historic drainage. In those cases where drainages have been disrupted, then we refer to the construction standards and have folks try to basically just work with Bill and county engineer on dealing with how to come into compliance with basically just the stormwater management plan in terms of making sure that stormwater is going into the right drainages that have been mapped in the stormwater drainage master plan. Sorry, that was a little confusing. So if not already captured for rainwater harvesting or using that for irrigation, or water leaving the roof of any structure or any impermeable surface shall be captured and directed into detention basins or swales with intentional overflows to slow and spread sink water. And then we just say that basins or swales shall be designed per specifications in a landscape manual. So it's really simple. It's just basically like trying to get people to think about, like, as Katie said, where is water coming from off of your roof? How is it flowing across your property? And how can you best use that water for your landscaping, or just make sure that it's not, you know, affecting your neighbor's property when it runs off your property. Yeah. So that's the basic, and this would be completely new for just small lots, small development, you know, single family dwellings, small scale commercial. And then it goes into sections, the original section 6.7 drainage, this is all of our current language. It's in our code. And Dan was gonna take a look at this, and I know that there's some need for improvement on this section as well. So he was gonna look at that, give us some recommendations.
To add a little bit to that, I think part of the intent was to so there's two different scenarios, right? There's scenario A, these small lots that haven't previously been subjected to any kind of drainage requirements. Now there's going to be some basic requirements for them. They're not necessarily going to have to do complicated calculations, you know, in order to prove that they're doing this right. We more just want them to start thinking about how water is moving through their property and which water is being generated by like impervious surfaces or built surfaces on their property, and trying to take care of that stormwater. And also trying to get them to understand how that could actually be useful for their landscaping. But then something that we still need to work through, and where Dan's going to be thinking about, is on larger developments, you know, new subdivisions, multifamily, you know, larger commercial. There are already drainage requirements that require really expensive studies, and so potentially this could be an alternative to an expensive study to be able to build some of these smaller, like more smaller basins, which actually work better than the larger basins, and that if you're able to do that, there might be an alternative to having to do the more expensive process, which could be an incentive.
So any thoughts or comments on that section? Drainage.
I think it's great.
Okay.
to be able to calculate some of your, total runoff into like some permaculture design, and then, you don't have to design to, as large of a scope, but kind of
Right.
diffuse it out in something that you already want to do that's good for the local ecosystem. That's good.
Well, small and simple is good.
Yeah,
Yeah, something a homeowner can calculate on.
right.
The current understanding of hydrology writ large is that retaining more water in many small places upland conserves more water than detaining much water in one concentrated large place on the downwind side. That theory is scalable to subdivision or the entire Colorado River basin. Same.
I would say too, just another comment is this could potentially help cut costs as well. Maybe not so much on like a single family, but multifamily or a condo type situation, because we still had to, like a case or an example would be like on our project, we still had to design to like the total, I don't know, they said like maybe the 500. So this infrastructure is like way too big, and that comes with a cost, right? Like you should see the size of like the pipes.
Yeah.
It's huge, and it's all being, all of the permeable surface or impermeable surfaces are going into like little garden beds and swales and things.
Right.
So if we were able to cut costs with less material, that's gonna ultimately benefit the buyer.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and if you look at like the hospital and Grant Center, where they set up their little drainage system on their properties.
Mm.
And there in the city, we have drains that go over the road,
Right.
curb and gutter. But that little drainage also has all that, landscaping inside of it to
Mhm.
maintain that water so that it doesn't turn into mud.
Right, yeah.
So, and if you could do this on your own property, and we have required that before. Yeah, but after 2 or 3 different homeowners, that kind of goes away because you start changing it, not knowing that that's supposed to be a part of it. So there's gotta be a way that when you require it, that it shows up on some kind of in their deed or somehow they work that into it so that it stays part of what has to happen. That's part of the deed of the road problem.
Well, that,
100%.
we had talked about putting it on your tax plat thing, like how you get your tax roll.
In the recorders.
I just feel like that is a great way because before I was on planning commission, I don't know anything, right? Like, what things do I interact with Grant County? I did interact with that. And so it'd be like, maybe, it's an important thing. Maybe it's like, I feel like that portal is a useful way to get historical things like, oh, hey, there's
It's
this.
only so much.
Right. Well, I mean, but that thing on the internet, wherever that's stored, that link has.
Oh,
that
I see.
in there. Right, and I think as we still build on more marginal, not marginal, but weird land that didn't get built on before, this is gonna be more and more important. Like Murphy Flats was like difficult things, and we're gonna just see more like, because building costs, the cost of things justify building there. Like, let's see more of that.
Yeah, that, the long-term like enforceability is probably something we should think about more. How,
And it's happened on a lot of persons.
Well, it's also.
Right, like that
legal
Pack
thing.
Creek situation, at my
Yeah.
old city park, that whole, I can't remember the name.
The Nuevo Court.
Yeah,
That was-
gosh,
that
that's
was-
such a bummer. It sounds like nobody really knew how the water was. being
Well, all of
moved. It
those-
might have changed, people might have changed their own land and
Yep,
I don't know the full scope.
that's a really good example.
But there's also a legal
going
thing,
awry.
like if you don't maintain your ditch, you caused your property, the neighboring property a bunch of damage. You can't be like, well, I didn't know, like, it's like, people need to know.
Yeah, I mean, the drainage design would be part of the landscape plan that would be submitted with their application or their building permit. So there would be a record of it. It's just a matter of tying it to the property over time with ownership change and
And that's
somehow.
what I'm saying, how do you interact with property, like, where do you bury a coffee can and it's like, here's the instructions to your property, like the water meters here, you know, it's like, I
Yeah,
found that thing in the county recorder to be very useful to be like, oh, hey, here's some things I need to know about my place. I don't know, that's my 2 cents.
Final class will sometimes have that information.
right.
But not every homeowner gets that, or will they ever get it? They might get it through their.
I'm just saying, dummy me,
Time
use
reports
that,
you get.
I use that link. Like, if I use that link, then, but I'm a lowest common denominator, right? Like, if I use that, then I put my eyes on that kind of thing.
Are you talking about the link on the on the parcel map where you can?
Or just
click
where you
on
find your tax roll and
Oh,
all
your
that
tax roll,
stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, I don't know what that is, like, it's
Yeah.
still, you know,
Plat maps, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
there's
just saying,
different
that's a good thing for it, interacting with citizens about their property,
yeah,
like.
for sure. More and more we're working.
It's just gonna, it'd be
to
hard.
get all that
It's
stuff
something
online.
that needs to be thought about, but I don't know where you put it. I really don't know where you put it. There are some properties up on Highland Drive that had to build drainages off their property, where it's on their property, but it's off away from their house. And of course, when they sold, it was all there, it was perfectly wonderful. Well, somebody went in there and said, I didn't like that little ditch in my yard, because my kids kept breaking their legs in it. Filled it up. My neighbor next door wants to fill up the concrete ditch in her backyard. So I won't worry about mine, they go down my ditch.
Yeah, no, yeah, we're never gonna be able to like
I know.
control all of it, but, and you don't want to necessarily, but like, I think there's ways we can figure out.
And
How
those
to
are just
make
things to
that-
think about while you're working.
Yes, exactly.
Because there's other things that are gonna be considered, it'll become a problem down the road.
Yeah, I mean, with, now that we're doing all of our applications online and everything's in a database and it's all attached to parcels. But the parcel data and the tax assessor's data, like, there could be a way where we could have just a little portal where people could go and if they're interested in buying a property, it would be knowing that that's part of their due diligence to go look at what are all the things that were approved on that property and I don't know, we could definitely have landscape plans up attached to each parcel because that they will be submitted through the database that way.
People do that now. I mean, most people do due diligence, check them. That's why we have title reports. The title company put in what they want.
Yeah.
If they've checked things in the portal, I mean, I wouldn't have to do that. But I would want house.
Okay, well, these are good things to be working on for sure. Okay, so that's drainage. I mean, any of you have any comments or perspective on the idea of combining landscaping and drainage? Or is that a good idea or should we?
I think that's okay.
Yeah, I think as long as, you know, drainage is tied a little bit more to engineering and grading. So I think if, you know, Bill and Dan are thumbs up.
Yeah.
Those guys have letters behind their name. I'm feeling good.
Yep, we're working with them on this for sure. Okay, let's see. Yeah, try to get through this list. I don't know. What's most important, so. We talked last time about exempting government facilities and schools in terms of the turf requirements and or not, maybe not exempting them completely, but having different requirements. One of the things one of the requirements we have in the code, in the draft code right now is that any turf grass over 10 acres on any of these types of properties would need to be irrigated with gray water, effluent, or untreated water. And I don't know if that's going far enough or if, I guess we were kind of wondering your perspective on if these facilities and like their big lawns that are associated with them should be handled in a different way or maybe we should break them down into like, I mean, at least government facilities like the county building, for example, could do a lot. The county properties, you know, could do a lot better in terms of landscaping. Maybe there's not like, it's not like they use the lawn for kids playing or something, you know? So it's more just kind of for aesthetics. So maybe there's something to be said about parsing out government facilities or public buildings that should have more stringent requirements for turf, and maybe schools are exempt, or I don't know.
I don't know, you can do anything about schools anyway, because they're state owned. They're higher up in the.
School district properties, like, yeah, they probably don't answer to us.
We could probably
anyway.
do more with parks and of course, I mean, I love what the city did with theirs.
Mhm.
I'm not, haven't, and I'm sure the reason why grass is there, it's ease of maintenance. Why I have it, so much easier than pull weeds.
Do they,
Right.
do these things happen so infrequently? That is, that we approve
know.
a new park or a school,
It's true.
that you could put something in that if you want more than 10 acres, then the county commission would kind of approve it specially or not approve it
Right, could
specially.
look at it kind of more in a special circumstance, kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that makes sense.
I feel like also,
By case basis.
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, no, it's okay. I just like keep trying to get a word in sometimes, so I pounce too early sometimes. The requirement for government buildings, I feel like is the only thing that I'm kind of like, well, if this government is enforcing the strict rule, we should probably be leading by example.
Right,
We should probably say like, okay, you guys can't have lawns, and therefore we also aren't gonna have a lawn, because Grand County does have a lot of lawns, and so does, the city has some lawns as well, right?
well,
But
cemeteries,
that's different, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, that seems like a very touchy issue that I don't really wanna go into, so I guess I'm specifically
Yeah.
thinking of like government buildings.
Right.
So like around the courthouse or things like that. If
Yeah.
that could be one thing where we're saying like, we're gonna set an example and follow the strictest standards.
and maybe
for
that
this.
doesn't need to be in the ordinance, but we could like, as part of adopting the ordinance, the commission could be like, okay, we're gonna like, lead the
Resolution.
example here.
But a lot of the newer government buildings, obviously, but I mean, the hospital doesn't have grass.
Yeah, I
Grass
think
and
you're right. Like
grass.
naturally, there's more of an inclination for new development to do more of that xeriscaping kind of.
But
I don't know that that's
Style.
gonna be that big of an issue, but it'd be advantageous to have it in the code, say, just, I don't, we never have to deal with it.
Right. If we ever have to, it could be evaluated on a case by case basis or something.
And we have like Old City or Old Spanish Trail Arena. You know, like you can't irrigate there. I mean, like, Lissa applied for a permit to reclaim their water, but it was so cost prohibitive. Like, there's no way to do that. Like, it's like, oh yeah, just irrigate with gray water flowing under. There's no source in that.
Well, that's a recreational facility.
But there's no water to tap into. Like it's at the sewer plant and it would have to be pumped up valley, which they determined was like impossible to do without millions and millions of dollars.
Right. Can we include language in this just says must be irrigated with this if available, otherwise, right? Same as the rest of the language?
Is your point, Erin, that you think that that would just kind of take care of itself without regulation?
Well, I'm just saying, it's like, why even have it in there? Because it wouldn't be able, it suggests that you can just do it, right? Like, oh yeah, just water the grass with treated sewer water. Well, there is no treated sewer water. That's kind of my thing. It's like, okay, so do we want our parks, like, I'm like, oh, like if we want to have a place where you can play ball with the kids, like, is it worth it to have on a place or not? Like, I know what you're saying, don't be hypocritical with the government, but it's like, yeah, but okay, you can go here for it. And,
But you know, Makeda brought up a really good point, and that is, when I was looking at the government facilities in schools, I was thinking of those as public use areas. And there's a difference between a government facility and a public use area.
That's true.
And I think we would all encourage grass in a public use area like City Park, where we would discourage it in a government facility
Yeah.
like a courthouse.
Yeah, I think that's the distinction I was kind of getting at too, because I think we need to.
I think, if we do choose to write this provision in, I mean, we haven't even begun to really think about the language, but we could use a term like public use. We could also specify active recreation area, and we could put together some definitions of how do you know if something's an active recreation area or not? And, just try to get down to that a little bit more. And then, potentially there could be additional requirements about, it has to be irrigated with certain types of water. and or, yeah, it has to use drought tolerant grass, like these sorts of things could be in there potentially.
Seems like it's just an admin building.
Okay, that's good feedback, thank you. For certain areas, we were, certain zones, we were thinking that there might be additional requirements such as a tree requirement. For the future general business areas that are kind of being more fleshed out and developed through the future land use plan. That would be kind of along Highway 191 where the frontage roads are gonna be going. And then neighborhood, commercial and multifamily. So these are like more intense developed areas that would be, the idea of the tree requirement would be kind of creating shade and, in high pedestrian use areas. So that was just, that's something that, it's been in there, I think was in.
It's from this, it's from the cities, so we copied the city there, except the city requires it in every lot, and so we were thinking there's a lot of places in the county where it's really not necessary, and so we were trying to base it on where we figured now or in the future, there would be people walking, you know, along a sidewalk or biking, and in the summer in 100-degree heat, it might be really useful to have, you know, something that is encouraging the development of a corridor, of a shaded corridor for active transportation.
I would plug that DNR has a genius named Jaron Farley. He's the state's urban and community forester. And you should just call him and write down whatever he says. He's realistically maybe one of my smartest colleagues, and there are grant opportunities for businesses to plant trees. There's all kinds of stuff. Call Jaron Farley if you want to have a trees in like neighborhood commercial storefront, you know, that pretty stuff. You got to talk to that guy. He's
Okay, awesome, thank you. Yeah, so right now, the language says that a minimum of 1 tree for every 40 linear feet of street frontage would be required within the front yard setback. And what is the city's also 40 feet?
Yeah, I believe so.
And obviously the city's doing that, it's a much more urban situation. I think they're wanting to really create that, you know, the canopy situation in the city limits. But I think out in the county, it does not make sense to require trees everywhere, but like in these areas where people are, there's gonna be like high pedestrian activity, potentially just having some shade, requiring some built-in shade, trees would be good. So yeah. I don't know, any thoughts on this one besides Tony's recommendation? All right, I think that's, are we done with the last thing on the list? Oh, the only other thing that we were thinking of, is a new requirement that we didn't have in the original draft was requiring the installation of plumbing that's compatible with gray water recycling. Did we have it?
We had it.
Okay, but there was maybe a question of whether that should stay in there or not, and I think Katie was saying that it's relatively inexpensive to install this infrastructure or plumbing connections, so I don't know, like.
That's what I've heard, Aaron. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Oh, yeah, I mean, if you were to, let's say you had a slab house, right? And we were to try to retrofit your house, I mean, I'd be jackhammering, it'd be $20,000, $40,000, right? For me to install it, it's like $200, maybe under 500. So it's like one of those things, it's like, hey, when we're talking about trees on this, I'm like, you know, you on a normal 1,500 square foot house or whatever, you could get, you know, 4 extra trees on it, like, you know, medium sized trees, like, yeah, that's good. Does the money pay out right now? No, but maybe it'll become, I notice people are interested in it. And it's like one of those things, it's like to retrofit is like insane. So, yeah.
And just a clarifying question, am I right in that this savings, would be made possible just by stubbing out? You don't actually have to install the actual gray water infrastructure. You just want to build your house in such a way that you could later
Good, it's
install the
like
gray.
that you switch.
Yeah.
And then it turns all your gray water into that.
So it's, so just that aspect of it is very doable, not adding a lot of cost.
Right, like
Okay.
you put that into a 30-year loan, I mean, it's like half a cent a month, So I think it's kind of a,
Lisa, I think maybe the reason that we had this in here, was because we were discussing whether it belonged in the landscape ordinance or not. And there had been some other things that we had taken out, like the city has some requirements for like water sense fixtures, which we took out. And I mean, potentially we also could update other aspects of the code in the same ordinance, but within their respective section. For me, I feel like it could go either way. I think that it makes sense to be in the landscape ordinance because it affects landscaping.
I could agree with that. I would have to look at I hadn't thought about where else it would be appropriate to put into our code. If it's not, because it's, otherwise it's not part of building code, so.
I think if it's a plumbing requirement, it should be in the building code.
Right, but.
Otherwise, the plumbers aren't gonna see it, and the building inspectors won't inspect.
Yeah, because this is happening when you're making house plans to pour slabs and stuff, so it needs to be like.
Right, but part of the building permit process is that they have to, it comes to planning and zoning for us to sign off on the building permit, so before it even gets. Like this would be one of the things we'd be checking off to see if they have it. And, so it would be part of their approval for their building permit.
Let's put it this way, if it's in the plumbing code, the responsibility is clear.
Yeah. No hidden costs, like that's what it's like.
Yeah, just
you can
avoid
buy this new
confusion.
car for $2,000, that's way off, but
And this,
okay, you time yourself for that, and it's like at the last minute, all these hidden fees, it kind of has that feel. Probably.
this
We
is,
can't put things.
No, we just follow the international, like the county's building
Yeah.
department just follows international
it's in
building.
the
code.
That's
code
UBC.
there, it's allowed. It's just not mandated.
Right,
Well, maybe
Still
Bill
would
can
follow
give some.
the-
yeah, maybe we should talk with Bill about it.
It'll be this fall under that where you come in, where you check it.
Yeah, it
It
would
wouldn't
be
necessarily
planning and
be
zoning.
building code.
And what's cool, I mean, we've got it all at Arroyo Crossing. I mean, people are wanting to, I just did a irrigation workshop. People want to use it. Like, people are like, oh yeah, sure. Like, it's not that hard to figure out.
Yeah,
So.
okay, that's good to know.
and this is 7 o'clock, so I don't want to
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
going, but this applies, I'm assuming, to also commercial properties like hotels, because
Right.
at the amount of showers that people are having, just thinking about that, so.
Yeah, totally. Be great for that.
Is there any issue of being considered legal non-conforming if you wanted to make a change to your property, but you don't have gray water, like you wouldn't
Oh.
have to incur?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Well, the way it's written is all new properties or new buildings, so I don't think that would apply
You
in
mean
this situation.
for the applicability section?
If you did a
Yeah, I think
25%
that's.
Well,
change.
I think, but we do have the thing about coming into compliance, like if.
Right,
So we
but-
would probably want to just have a little caveat under this section, a little exemption saying, this is only
New
new
construction.
construction. This only applies to new
I
construction.
think that it says that though.
In this section.
It says,
Okay,
it
says
says
all
when you
new
pull a
construction.
permit,
Yeah,
okay,
but you'd pull a permit for,
for an addition or a renovation.
yeah, renovation even, yeah.
We'll just
And
have
if
that
it's
in.
under slab, like Aaron said, you're not gonna wanna do this.
Right, I mean, I'm just saying, in the place where it's talking about gray water, it says all new construction must stub out for gray water.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so yeah, I think that's all of the sticking points that we wanted to review. Does anybody have last comments? Any last comments?
Very minor comment, which is, I can't remember, do I have it in front of me? Anyway, there was some point where you talk about vegetation and number of square feet per animal. Something, and obviously, you know this too, I mean, depends what you're grazing.
that is still under consideration. We were talking about putting in some kind of an exemption for personal livestock raising. And if we did that, it would probably have to be square footage per animal, but we haven't really put too much more thought into that.
And I think that, so in this draft, I don't think it's in there.
It's not.
But, it would probably come under the way that the personal livestock is being dealt with is in terms of the plant species that they're planting for their grazing for their livestock. So there's nothing against anybody having livestock in this ordinance. It's just
The pasture.
pasture, thank you.
Yeah.
The pasture, the plant species that they'd be using to plant their pasture would be possibly affected by the plant species list. And so that's where we would make some exemptions with that possibly.
We're looking
But
at
that's
that.
still kind of, yeah.
And
So I think that's one of the main things we probably want to get the commission to weigh in on and like whether they feel like that would be a good direction to go or not.
But the land use code has a section that you're only allowed so many animal use per acre.
That's true.
So if you only
Yeah.
got 2 animals, you're not planting on pasture.
Right.
And oftentimes I complain, you
Fine.
Right, yeah, there are those folks out there that have pasture though for their.
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe it's so few that it wouldn't matter.
It's still something to keep, because if it does come up, you need to have. theirs.
Yeah.
How much more, this is gonna come before us again, I assume.
Yeah,
In the-
well, I mean, it depends, like if. I guess we should probably talk about that because after the commission workshop, I'm sure there'll be some revisions from there. And then, yeah, most likely it would be best to come back to the planning commission before we bring it forward as a public hearing.
Yeah, I'm just asking because I know sometimes when we have really lengthy new code that we're trying to pass, in the past, you've sent out like what you're working on and had us like comment and provide like suggested edits and things there. And that saves a lot of time during the meeting where we're discussing and asking questions and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, I know that adds to your workload a lot, so if that is the case, then forget about it, but I'm just thinking of being more timely and considering how much you guys are
Sure.
spending it after work meetings and stuff. Is it possible to get a copy of this code that we can go through and provide
Sure.
suggested edits? Cause I think that might just help move things a little bit along.
Yeah,
That
you mean
feel-
like in a Google Doc format where you can
Yeah.
suggest edits?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could, yeah, I can definitely share that,
I'm
share
thinking
a
of
draft of it. with you guys.
expediting for your purposes.
Yeah, we've done that in the past, you're right. Yeah, we haven't done that in a while, but I think that's a good way. Okay, so we'll make sure to share it out with you guys.
So are we ready then to move to, are we gonna do future considerations?
I think we could just quickly breeze over the future considerations, yes.
That was to amend future consideration.
So one thing that we're working on. That Mikkel has been helping me to kind of get established is. Creating or establishing a precedent for just setting our agendas. At the current meeting for the next meeting, so that we're more aware of what's gonna be on the next agenda and then maybe even. We'll definitely providing more materials in advance so that you have a lot more time to review things instead of it just being on the Friday before the meeting. I know I've always said I was gonna work on that, but we're gonna. Mikkel's kind of taking some of the planning commission agenda duties and we're gonna try to really work together to make sure that. Those materials in the packet is published in advance, so it's not just on Friday, it might hopefully be on Wednesday. But we would like to, starting this evening, just kind of brainstorm or get your comments on what you think should be on the agenda for the next meeting. Obviously, we are working on the outdoor lighting revisions. Those weren't ready for you for this evening, and that would have been too much anyway to have both of those on here tonight. But I hope to have a draft of the outdoor lighting revisions, at least the main points that we're gonna be looking at revising, and then
just a list of the land use code updates that we're working on, all kind of comprehensive updates. So I'm just open to anything else that you guys want to have on the agenda. I know Aaron had some ideas about the ADO, maybe having a discussion, bringing up the ADO pilot
Oh,
program.
yeah, sorry, yeah,
Sorry.
I've talked to 3 people that have been going through the process. They got some, I've been trying to be like, what could we change? What couldn't we change? Kind of, their frustrations and victories
Yeah,
in that. So, I think people would be willing to talk about that and see if the commission is hot on that to do that again.
yeah,
Yeah, I see that. I also like the idea of moving this future considerations. It feels like, I don't know about the rest of you guys, it's like, hey, there's things I want to talk about. And it never happens. We just kind of dies in committee, and that being at the end of the meeting, we all want to go. And it's like, well, how do we talk about this? Like, I just wrote a letter in the editor. It's going to be coming out this week about like the problem that Escape and Moab Heat and Cool did. I think there's some like things we really need to think about with commercial zoning. And I wish Trish was here, but it was kind of like, hey, you know how we have local housing? Like, can we have local business here? Because I go out to the business park and half the units are owned by dudes out of town that just park their Jeeps in them. Great, do what you want with your property, but that's a commercial place that's no longer being able to be used by like a heating and HVAC company. Like, wow, that would be great if they could get those places. And I'm like, I like, these are in the paper. These are issues that need to be done. I just talked to Randy and Jared, and he was like, dude, where are we supposed to go? There's not space. We need to think about stuff like that. That would be a future consideration that I'd like to see.
Jump in there and I don't know if this is exactly how Robert's rules read, but generally standard of practice on every other public board that I'm on, if any board member, commissioner has something they'd like to talk about and they'd like to get it on an agenda, they run that through the chairman of the board. The chairman of the board works with the planning director and it gets on the agenda. So don't feel ever like you're not giving an opportunity, but generally that process is just like, hey, Obi's right now. Obi's the chair, like, hey, I want to talk about this, bullet point that.
You mentioned it on the future agenda, like, would that be kick off that process or?
yeah, I think. So yeah, that's how it has been with my understanding. I work with OB. We try to communicate about the agenda every 2 weeks. And I will ask, what, if there's anything that I need to put on the agenda from his perspective, and check in with the items that I have from staff. So yeah, the formal process is to direct that to the chair. But I think we could do that during the meet, like now. You could probably be like, okay, this is what I would like to have on the agenda for the next meeting, and then OB would say thumbs up, or maybe we should think about it another time or something like that.
And I would say right now, either of those two or both, but it'd be good for me to get more detail. So if you just email me a little blurb on both of them, then we probably start. Great.
Okay.
And then we should then think, do we want to move up the kind of future considerations to earlier in the meeting? It's an interesting question. We should discuss it.
Yeah, we should. I mean, the only thought that's popping in my mind that would say not to do that is because during the meeting, usually we come up with certain things that we're like, oh, we should put that on another, on a future agenda for a topic. And so then by the end of the meeting, you have like 3 or 4 of those things, but you wouldn't know at the beginning. So, but let's think about it. Maybe there could be like before. You could check in on the agenda like before the meeting starts with just some of those items that have been emailed to you, OB, and like just things that we know of. And then at the end, we could check in again.
It's actually, I think that's a really good point that you brought up, Tony, and I've not been doing that, but you know, one good example would be the future land use plan contractor decision that's pending. That's literally days away.
Right.
I think that's an example of one where I could email Obi and say, hey, can we get this on the agenda for the next meeting? Just a general update on who did we choose. And each one of those submissions had a really nice calendar too, that'll give some glimpse as to the next,
Yes.
you know, the next general review meetings.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's probably a good, I hadn't really thought about doing that, but I think that's a really good reminder.
Sorry to throw you under the bus, man.
It makes Obi's job easier, actually.
I just passed the email. No, I'll look at them carefully and probably ask questions. So, and then, do we want to do anything on outdoor lighting provisions?
Oh, so that's, I was just saying that that is one of the future considerations that'll be on your agenda for the next meeting.
And same with the land use code updates.
Right,
Yes.
yep, exactly. That's all I have.
Well, we have a motion to adjourn this early meeting.
I motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second. Great. All in favor? Good
Thanks, team.
discussion.
Thanks, staff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But hey, it's still daylight outside.
Well, we didn't have the meeting a couple of weeks ago, so this one.
Gotcha, a little bit of it.
Yeah, we had it every other.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Question about section
The meeting before was.
We're gonna look at, right, like.